svenska, engelska gick bra, så att engelska är vad ni får idag. Och med det sagt.
Då kör jag igång klockan nu.
Yes, do so.
Varsågod.
So, what is a test case? A test case is an ID. A test case is an assumption and hypothesis. It's a mental representation of the software that we are testing at this state. Hi, my name is Kristoffer Nordström, and I am the owner and founder of Nordström Test Consulting. And I also work for a company called LTG-12 based in San Jose, California. And I have the privilege of doing so remotely from Costa Rica. A little bit about myself first. I usually describe myself as a test developer. And that really means that I am absolutely nuts about everything that has to do something with testing. I eat, read, sleep testing. That's what I do. I love that shit. The way I do testing is that I most of the time employ my development skills to enhance my testing. I work as a developer. I have programming skills as well. Sometimes test automation, sometimes I develop test tools for myself or my test colleagues. Sometimes I dissect the software under tests, code inspection, etc. But most of the time I use my development skills. So I love to automate testing, but the number one reason why I do that is actually because I want testers to focus on quality human testing. I do not want them to sit and fill out checklists. I want them to do real testing, challenge stuff, have assumptions, and look at what the software actually is doing. So that's it, that's about me. I only have 12 minutes today. And as testers, test leads, and test managers, and also project leads, managers, and developers, we are taught that when we are working on a feature, one test case is good, right? Feels good. 2 is even better. And therefore 3 must be, and so on. And actually having a test case is kind of like having a blanket. Feels good, feels warm, it provides you some sort of safety. And over the years we work on features of the projects, and we build up this mass of test cases, right? That represents the software as we thought it behaved at that specific time. And as I said, it gives you a sense of security, right? Feels good. We have these test cases, check them, things must be behaving like we think they do. Well, actually, test cases create a false sense of security. And when we execute the test case, it's still there, right? It doesn't get consumed. It's there tomorrow, it's there next week, it's there next year if we wanted to. And at this point you might be thinking, hey, eating the cake and keeping it. Well, I'm here today to say, wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. I've been in organizations where they are proud of having several thousands of test cases. Manual, scripted, automated, doesn't matter. They're proud of it. And I've been in organizations where they are embarrassingly aware of having thousands and thousands of test cases. Toyota Production System, also known as TPS, was hijacked by American consultants and labeled as lean. They put a package on it, a ribbon, and delivered a solution. But TPS in its original form talks a lot about waste, right? Muda, as it's called. It basically says that any resource that we put to use that is not used to produce value is considered waste. So what is the value of a test case? Information. We perform a test to gain new insight into the product that we didn't know before. And actually there are seven different types of waste as well identified. For example, we have the waste of overproduction, when we produce too much of something and it just sits in the inventory. That's waste. We don't use it. We have the waste of stock at hand, and that's when we have a full inventory. It takes up space and it adds to the clutter and the chaos of our inventory. Waste of movement, having too much inventory actually makes us less agile. We aren't as nimble and we can't respond to the organization's changing needs over time. And interestingly, we have one waste here called waste of making defective products, and I'll get back to that a little later. But really, having a large inventory, it just slows us down. It becomes a burden, because imagine if we have all these thousands and thousands of test cases that we are supposed to try and execute as many of as possible. We need, in an agile context, to start testing on day one. When I say testing, we need to get up and talk with the developers. Ask, how are you planning to test it, to develop this feature? How have you interpreted the requirements? We need to talk with those who are responsible for the requirements. Where did you get this input from? What are your assumptions? And yes, we need to get up and talk with the customers as well. What are your expectations? And if we have all these test cases, they're going to slow us down. Because the product will change over time, and so must our test cases as well. We need to do maintenance, we need to fix bugs in them. And yes, test cases contains bugs as well. And if we have all the scripted, documented test cases, that will slow us down. We can't be as responsive and testing the new features that we actually want to test as well. And just imagine it being your first day as a tester in your organization, and the test manager comes and says, hey, son, here's the test cases, here's the inventory. Yeah, well, it's mass of test cases, right? It's just confusing. Where do I start? What's important? Have anyone tested this test case? Is that important? It's just confusing. It just adds to this chaos and disorder of this inventory of all test cases that no one is touching. But if someone has documented it, if someone has written it down, we have the perception as humans that, hey, they must know what they talked about when they wrote this down, so I'm going to go with this line of fault. And that might not be true. One of the things that we testers really strive to do is become free of assumptions. We want to go in with a clear mind and do not assume stuff, or at least don't let other people tell us what we should assume. And that's what I talked when I mentioned waste of producing a defect product. It becomes difficult to find defects, and I wasn't referring to our software. I was referring to our test cases, because they contain bugs as well. We have this mass of unused test cases, it becomes a clutter, and it becomes very, very burdensome to update them as we go along. Now, of course, and this is important, I'm going to use the favorite word that I have, context. If you're working in a very strict, formal environment where you have requirements that you absolutely have to document stuff, of course, you should do so. You have to do so. Just think if you're working in legal, finances, or medical equipment for that matter. You have stringent requirements, you have checklists that need to be filled out. Fine. You have to have lots of scripted test cases. You have to have lots of documentation. But if you're working in, let's say, a web portal environment, you might not need all that documentation. What you really want to focus on in your testing is finding bugs and finding new information. And having all this documentation / test cases in place will slow you down. So, what's the solution then? What do? You throw stuff out. It's as simple as that. It's just like spring cleaning. And I mentioned this before. A test case is like a blankie. It feels good. It tells us what we should do. We don't have to think for ourselves. So when we start throwing stuff out, questions arise like, do I need this? Well, I might find a bug with that. Perhaps I will execute that test case later on. What should I throw out? Things become uncertain. You have to start to think for yourself, and that's scary for some people. But throw stuff out. they are burdening you down. And if you're really, really paranoid about this, what you can do is put a secondary place somewhere. A database, a file folder, whatever. Take your test cases that you sort out, put them there, and if you haven't touched them in 6 months, delete them. You ain't gonna need them. I promise you. I do the same thing with my clothes at home. I take stuff in my wardrobe. Ooh, but this shirt is so nice. Put them in a bag. 6 months later, if I haven't touched it, great. It moves on out of my house. So we've cleared out all these manual scripted test cases. What can we fill this void with? Playing cards? No, let's do something more productive. One thing you can do is do exploratory testing, risk-based testing. Exploratory testing, normally when we do testing, we have these 3 different phases in our testing. We design our test phases, then someone else executes them, and afterwards we hopefully do some learning afterwards. Exploratory testing can easily be summarized as simultaneous test design, test execution, and learning at the same time. And I would love to tell you more about exploratory testing at another time and place. It's fascinating stuff, and it's really good to work with. Another thing, and this is something I preach very much when I talk with agile testers or people who want to become agile testers when I'm out discussing, communication. You get up and you talk with your colleagues in the organization. You talk with the developers. How is this working? How have you implemented this? What was your decision here? When we start communicating with people, when we challenge their assumption, that's testing. You don't have to click on the mouse to do testing. Just by asking questions, we are actually testing assumptions that we have on the product, how it should behave. And finally, get up and talk with your customers. Engage them. What are they expecting? What is value to them? And with that, thank you.
Kristoffer, någon snabb fråga, 1 eller 2, medan vi byter. Någon uppenbar fråga här? Inte? Då funderar ni om det finns någonting ni vill följa upp med Kristoffer på Open Space, någon tanke, någon fundering, så ska vi välkomna gården här.